All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the first challenge for tonight that we'll try and work through as a group. So this one is called repeated characters. So we're going to write a method that takes in an array of characters and a similar length array of integers. Return a string consisting of every character repeated the number of times as indicated in the integer array, with each character corresponding to the number in the same position. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this first one here. Okay, so kind of as we've discussed on some of these previous ones, I recommend taking small steps, building on this incrementally until we get to our final solution. So kind of the first question we always ask ourselves, how many parameters do we have coming into this?
2.
Two, and what are they?
Array and num array.
Yep, so we've got two arrays coming in, and one is going to be an array of characters or array of strings, and the other is going to be an array of numbers. All right, so first thing I always want to do is make sure that I'm getting what I think I'm getting. So let's go ahead and console.log the char array and the num array. All right, and that looks to me what I'm looking for, right? So there's my char array ABC, there's my num array 1, 2, 3. So let's go ahead and take a look at writing some pseudocode here. So I need to access sorry, the replet's moving pretty slow here. All right. Sorry, let me hit refresh here and see if I can get a better connection to the replet. There we go, page unresponsive. All right, so I need to access each character in the character array. I then need to add that character to a result array as many times as indicated by the corresponding index position in the num array. I will need at least one loop to do this. I will need a built-in method to move additional elements into my result array. I will then need to return the result array. So does this sound like a pretty solid plan? Is there anyone think I'm missing anything? I've never actually done this one before, so it could very likely end up in a giant fireball that I'm recording to post on the internet for the rest of eternity.
Nice.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
Thanks.
So, all right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. I know that I'm going to want a array to hold all of basically all of the additional characters that I'm going to be creating. So let's do let result array equal just an empty array. All right. So I know that I want to be able to loop through. So I don't know for sure that it'll end with a for loop, but let's go ahead and start with a for loop. All right. So what am I doing here with my for loop? What are the three parts of my for loop again?
Where to start, how long, and I forgot the last one.
Right. So
You're
where to
counting by.
start, yep, how long to count, and what to count by. So I'm starting at 0. I'm counting to basically the something equal to the length of my array. So basically each element in my array, the length is 3. So I'm going to count to stop counting right before 3 because I start at 0. So 0, 1, 2, and I'm counting by ones. Right. So now the next step I would say is that I know that I need to push items in there. So I could say result dot push, or I'm sorry, result array dot push, and we can do char array I, right? And so, and now instead of just console.logging that, we can console.log the result array. And now at least I know that I'm going to have an array with ABC in it, right? Like, so I know that I'm successfully pushing my characters in it. And so what I'm thinking is that I would probably end up needing a nested loop in here. And this could also be done with built-ins, but I think I would stick with a nested loop and look at maybe doing a while loop that counts down and decrements the corresponding element inside the num array and keep going until it hits 0, and then I'll nest my result array dot push char array I a layer deep, so that way I'm looping through each character, but then I'm also going to loop through the num array. And so if the num array is 4 in that index position, I'm then going to hit through 4 times and push my character into that array 4 times before I move on to the next character. So does that make sense, or was that totally confusing to anyone?
Is
Nah,
it a loop within a loop?
Yes, it's called a nested loop. And a nested loops, so you will use nested loops when you're doing all of these algorithm challenges. But with the caveat that nested loops are really bad for performance. So, right, like if I have 3 items in my, so if I'm 3 by 3 and I only use 1 loop, I only need to go through it 3 times, right? If I do it in a nested loop, now I basically I believe I'm going through it 9 times. And if I go to a 4 by 4, now I'm going through it 16 times. So I've only added 2 items, but I've increased the amount of computation by almost 50% to be able to do it, right? And so these are things like when we start talking about big O notation, which I won't get a ton into. It's a concept that you'll touch in on Code Platoon, but big O notation basically is a way to calculate the performance of your algorithm. And there's different scales of big O notation that grow linearly. So if you add an additional, like one element to your algorithm, you have an additional like one calculation. But there's things that grow exponentially. So like if you add one element, you get 2 calculations. If you add 4 elements, you get 16 calculations, and so on and so forth. So it grows at an exponential level. And those tend to like you won't notice a difference if maybe you only needed to like parse through like 10 numbers or like an array that's like a length of 10, but all of a sudden if you do a like 10 may only take a half a second, but 100 elements may take 2.5 minutes. And if you put in 1,000, like it'll tie up your computer for the next year. And so, and there's problems out there that are still not able to be solved by computers because of the computational complexity of the algorithm. One of the most famous ones is the traveling salesman, where if you give a computer like 3 points on a grid and you tell it to pick the most efficient path between it, you're good, but it stops working around 25 points that it has to draw an efficient path from because the calculations become so immense. All right, so let's go ahead and do a while loop here. And we'll say while, let's see here, we want to match it to the same index position as what's in the char array. So we'll stick with I on that count. So the first one through, it'll be 0 and 0 is greater than 0. Right? And then what we want to do is push this in here. And then we need to, if I don't do anything to get rid of to decrement my num array, like it's at 1, if I don't do anything to decrement it, I should just get, it won't do anything, and eventually it'll tell me stack overflow, which means I used up all the virtual memory. There you go, REPL process died and expectedly signal killed, because I didn't decrement this, so it was never going to be, sorry, it needs to be equal to 0. So that's also why it was always going to be greater than 0 no matter what. So let's see, if we do, and I could have left it as greater than 0. Sorry, do that. And so we need to do num array I minus equals 1. So now each time we go through here, we're going to decrement it. So let's see here. A, B, B, C, C, C. All right, so you can see it in here. Let's go ahead and do this. So that is the solution to this one. And we can also grab this one just to make sure, and it looks like we're going to be spelling out hello with this. Right, so we get hello. Right, and it doesn't ask for it, but I mean, we could always join it on nothing, and then instead of returning the array, actually we could use it to spell words in here. Have I shown you Python Tutor, or has anyone been to Python Tutor before?
Never heard of.
Okay, so Python Tutor it does more than Python. It does several different languages, but it's a code visualizer. All right, and so you can do Python, Java, C, C++. It looks like they got rid of a bunch of languages, but JavaScript. So we're good right here. What Python Tutor does is it's kind of like a visual debugger for your code. So I use this a lot the first couple of weeks of Code Platoon, and I still use it once in a while when I'm trying to do something and for some reason I'm not visualizing it correctly and I need to walk through it step by step. And IDEs have debuggers, and like you'll learn more about that in Code Platoon as well. Like VS Code has a debugger, Chrome has a debugger built into it. If you are doing like JavaScript and React on the front end, but this one's just nice and simple. And so a lot of times when it's just like a simple algorithm challenge, I'll bring it here. And so what this does is kind of how when I was walking everyone through, like, this is what the computer does. It hits line 3, it does this. It hits line 4, it does this. Python Tutor walks you through it. So basically it ignores all of this for right now until it gets down here and it hits that method call. And so the method call comes up here. So we hit, it reads line 2, and we've got result array undefined. And then as it moves down here, result array has been defined as just an empty array. So char array is ABC, num array is 1, 2, 3, result array is an empty array. All right, so now we hit my for loop, and it's going to come in here. And so there's my for loop is loaded up. Now we're in the while loop, and now we're here. And so we hit one step forward, and we can see that it pushed it in, right? And then we also did our -1. So now you can see instead of that being a 1, 2, 3, it's a 0, 2, 3, right? So we exit the loop because that's not basically greater than 0 anymore, the first index position. We hit our for loop. Our for loop's going to increment to the next layer, and we're going to come back into our while loop, right? And so we do that, and so there's our B. There we decremented 2 to 1. There's our B. We decrement 1 to 0. So now they're both zeros. And now we'll come back up to the for loop. Again, we hit the same things, and we do the same thing for the 3 C's that we're going to plug in here. All right, so now we've counted to the end of our length of our for loop. We punch out of it, and we're going to return our result array, which is the return value is right here. Right, notice it went from being like just result array to now it's result array, but it's also the return value. Right, and I encourage anyone that gets stuck or has a hard time kind of visualizing what their code's doing, especially when you're looping, when you're doing control flow logic, and it's not spitting out the other end the way you thought it was going to. This is a great way to see it step by step. All right, so that was the first challenge. And again, this is pythontutor.com. Let's go ahead and...
Oh, one moment, please. I do have a question.
Absolutely.
So with concerning for loops, I understand that you usually, the block I is usually what's based off of what is currently counting up to, as in char array block I. So where did num array block I come from?
So because what we're doing is, and let me show this way. All right. So, and it can be confusing because it's 1, 2, 3, but remember, I is an iterator. It's counting. So each time we pass through here, I is going up by 1, right? So, and we're saying the char array down at length, and so the length of this is 3, right? So right, so not a trick question there. It's literally 1, 2, 3. There's 3 elements in here. The length will tell you the number of elements that are in an array. Now, are the index positions 1, 2, 3?
No.
Okay, what are my index positions?
0, 1, 2.
Right, so 0, 1, and 2, right? And so my instructions here say write a method that takes in an array of characters and a similar length of array of integers. So these two arrays have to be the same length, otherwise this will break. Excuse me. And return a string consisting of every character repeated the number of times as indicated in the integer array, with each character corresponding to the number in the same position, right? So when I come in here, so I is equal to 0, right? So this is literally the first pass through, this is I0, right? And I need to compare it against the position in, um, these two need to be synced up, right? Like I'm comparing the 0 index in num array to get how many times I need to loop through my 0 index in the char array, right? And so once this is done performing, I will then go to like I becomes 1, this becomes 1, and this becomes 1, right? And then this becomes 1. And this number is actually 2, right? It's the number 2 inside the array, right? And so then I'm going to push the character into my array, right? So I already did A and I've moved on. So now that I'm on B, I come in, this is now let num array 1, which is the number 2, and char array 1, which is B. And this is, so because num array 1, which is 2, is greater than 0, I come in, I push a B into my array, right? And then this number 2 physically becomes the number 1, but it's still in the 1 index position, right? And so I then go through my while loop again and I say num array box 1 is the number 1, which is greater than 0. I come in here, my char array 1, which is B, I'm going to push that in again, and then I'm going to decrement num array in the position 1, which was 1, is now 0, and this would already be 0. And so I come up here and I say num array 1, which is now 0, is not greater than 0. So I basically skip what's in this while loop and I come in here, there's no return, so I'm still inside my for loop, right? And so now this becomes 2, and this becomes 2, this becomes 2, and this becomes 2. And what this actually is the number 3, right? And this is also the number 3, because at the 2 index position is the number 3, and this is the letter C, right? And so now same thing, here I am, the number 3 is greater than 0. So I am going to come inside my while loop, that condition is met, and I'm going to push char at array 2, which is letter C, into my results. And then I'm going to decrement the number, basically number array position 2, which is the number 3 by 1. So this becomes a 2. This becomes a 2. And this becomes a 2. I start my while loop over again. Is this greater than 0? Yes, it is. It's the number 2. Okay, come in, push C in yet again. And then bump a number off this, subtract 1 again. So now this is a 1. It's a 1. It's now a 1. This is 1 is still greater than 0. I do it again. So here's my C. And then I decrement again. So now this is 0. So this is 0. And this is, and these are basically all zeros here. So I come in, is 0 greater than 0? No, it's not. I skip my while loop. I come back into my for loop, and this is basically going to be, this would be 3. It is not less than the char array length. That's equal to the char array length, which is 3. And then I punch out of my for loop. And then the last thing for me to do is return what I have left inside my result array, which is right here. Does that help?
Not really. I think I worded my question wrong. That so I understood that. What I meant was the I is iterating through char array. So the for loop is for char array. So since it's iterating through char array, it will be pushing char array block I. So I was wondering how the computer knew to populate num array I if it's not cycling through that.
So, well, again, we have to think to scope, right? So if the while loop is outside of the for loop here, now it has no idea what I is, right? If I run this, I'll get an error. Well, I should have gotten an error message. Where am I at here? Here's the for loop. Oh, it's because I'm doing this. I don't have my eyes in here. So let me undo this. Right, so now when I run this, there's my error. I is not defined, right? Remember what we talked about, like global and local scope. So I is defined inside this for loop only. If my while, that means that I is available to everything inside the for loop, right? As soon as I bring it outside of the for loop, it doesn't know what I'm talking about anymore, right? So remember, like at scope, so technically I could do let I equals 0 all the way out here, right? And then just put I here and let it get manipulated that way. But let's say if I have a whole nother function down here, and I write a for loop in here as well, and I do the same thing that just say I, what happens is that if this one changes I from 0 all the way up to 3, when I come down here and start this for loop, my I is now going to start at 3. It's not going to start at 0 again, right? So that's why we want to avoid global scope. But the reason that my while loop knew what num array I was is because it was already declared up here. And everything declared in here is available inside of it. Right.
All right,
So
I do understand.
does that help a little?
Yes, a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I went down the wrong path earlier. So, all right, let me just clean this up here a little bit. Okay, so it is 7:10. Let's go ahead and look at the next challenge, and we're going to split out into groups for this. Challenges. All right, so this one is called Back of the Line. And this one's going to use some built-ins. And this one is also going to take some thinking. So write a function that takes in 2 arguments, an array of names, and a number, either negative or positive. The number represents how many positions the names in the array should move. The expected output is the array of names with the names in their new positions. So examples here. So if I have Kyle, Stacy, Tina, Kenesha, and Greg, and I put in the number 2, notice that these names are all shifting 2 positions, right? And so it looks like we move them forward 2. So Greg would come to here, and then eventually Kenesha would come to here. So you then have Kenesha, Greg, Kyle, Stacy, and Tina. And same thing, if you put in a negative number, it's going to shift all of the names to the left one and wrap that around. So you can see that Kyle gets bumped to the end of the line with a negative number. All right, so with this one, you are going to need a loop, and you are going to need some control flow logic, and you are going to need a basically a result array that's going to be returned out of this. All right, so any questions for me before I split us up into breakout rooms?
All right, so with this one, we were asked to write a function that takes in 2 arguments, an array of names and a number, negative or positive. The number represents how many positions the names in the array should move. The expected output is the array of names with the names in their new positions. So if I have Kyle, Stacy, Tina, Kenesha, and Greg, if I throw a positive 2 in here, we're basically going to move the names off the end and throw them in the front. And if we are going to do a negative number, we take the first name and add it to the back. Now, some precursor stuff here is it helps to know what each of the 4 array addition and subtraction built-in methods do. So here's a little thing that I put together, some notes, and I'll leave this in here for when I post it. So, but pop takes the last item off in an array, and so basically it removes from the right. Push adds an item to the end of an array, so it adds to the right. And shift takes the first element off an array, so it removes from the left. And unshift adds an item to the start of an array, which means that it adds to the left. So if I look at a simplified example, let's just say 1, right? What I want to do is basically take everyone and move them 1 space to the right, which means that the name that I need to remove first is Greg, and then I need to add him to the left, right? So pop removes from the right, and unshift adds to the left, right? So if we take a look at this, so I know that I'm going to need to iterate through here, so I'm going to write a for loop. And so we're so used to iterating through an array, so we could do like r of names box or dot length But what happens with that is that if I take this route, that means that I'm counting to 5 every time because there's 5 names in here. And if I add an extra name, right now I'm counting to 6. And that's not how many times I want to perform my operation. I want to be able to specify how many times I'm going to perform the operation. So instead of r of names.length, I'm actually just going to use the user provided stopping point of num of positions. Right, and so now here's another thing that we look at. So if I console.log r of names.pop, right, I get the last name off the list, Charles, right? But if I do not do anything with this, then once that line of code is done, that name disappears forever. So then I can say console.log r of names, and we can see that Charles is no longer on there. Right, so there's Charles. Charles has been popped off. Now it's gone. So for me to be able to add in this name back in, what I need to do is save this as a variable. Right, and so now instead of losing it, so now if I come in here and I console.log pop name, right, there's Charles. Now it's preserved, it's saved, it's assigned. So the variable is declared, and then it is assigned the value of the last element of the array that's been popped off. So now what I can do is I can turn around and say r of names dot, and if I want to add to the left, I can do as an item to the start of an array, unshift. Pop name, right? And so now if I console.log r of names, now we see Charles there in the front, right? And if I bump this to 2, right? So we saw Charles move through the first time, and then we took Greg off the end and moved him to the front. So this is looking good for this. But if I change this to -2, right, nothing happens. And so what that tells me is I need to differentiate here between the positive and the negative number, because I am not, basically I'm not counting as at all, because the very first time through 0 is already greater than -2, right? So I need an if statement here saying if is greater than 0, do this. Else, now this one's going to look a little bit different because we're still going to start at 0, but now because we're going to be dealing with a negative number, we're going to say, well, I is greater than the num of positions. And then we also, instead of incrementing, we want to decrement. Right, so now we're counting down, we're starting at 0 and we're counting down to that negative number. Right, and so now the same thing, if I look down here, now I know that I want to take it from the other end. So shift takes the first item off of an array, right? So now I know that pop took it off the end, so we can say let shifted name equal r of names dot shift, right? And it works the exact same way. I've got to save this to a variable, otherwise I lose it. And we can do r of names dot push shifted name. Can get rid of this up here. And then we'll go ahead and return r of names. So I get, oh, I'm still inside the else statement. There we go. All right, so now if I run this -2, I would hope that I would see the names change to other places, right? And so now we've seen Kyle and Stacy get bumped to the end of the line instead of being up front. Does anyone have any questions about, like, again, kind of like thought process here, how I built incrementally? I solved for one case. I didn't try and solve for both positive and negative numbers at the same time. I only solved for one side, got that working, and then started to branch out and solve for my other case.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could you rewrite line 5 through 8 as a while loop, just so I can see how it would be written as a while loop? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, so I believe it would just be decrementing yeah, we'd have to count down. So let me see if I can do that here real quick. So, so it would just be while, I believe this would do the same thing. And change this back to a positive number. Right, and so now Greg and Charles have both been moved from the end to now they're the first two names.
Okay, awesome. And line 8, you could have also just wrote none of positions minus minus, right? Or is that different? Sorry.
I don't think so. Maybe you can. We can run it. We'll see what happens. Yep, you can.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I think the minus minus and plus plus are, they're kind of like they're built-ins for that. I just always use this syntax, but yeah, either one would work. And then I would think that possibly we could do this as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's anything taboo about that.
No, I mean, the only thing I'd say is, I mean, like, I wouldn't have any issues if I ran across this, but it just becomes like, you're making your code more compact, but at a certain point, does it become less readable or does it become harder to understand? Right, and so, because I mean, like, to the point where, like, in a lot of the code that I write here, like all the comments, like stretching everything out, assigning things to variables, is just to make the code easier to read. But yeah, no, definitely, like in a situation like this, you could like pull this up into here and make it a little bit smaller, right? So we could say, here is this version, and we could come down, right, and call this probably do this as the for loop here. So deleted something extra, 1 second here. So that matches with that. And that's the if statement. So this comes out to the if level because basically I'm just saying if this, and then you could even do before. Yeah, I'd probably leave it in the else because I don't return till the end. Otherwise, I'd have to duplicate my return statements. Yeah, so like this is smaller, and I could look at getting rid of the for loop and doing this as like seeing if I could do this as like a for each, except I wouldn't because I'm not going through every element in the array. But I could also look at pulling these out into like instead of being an if else statement, like move it into a ternary operator. And save on syntax there, but it's not always about like, and we make this decision all the time. Like I said, like, we work with like huge chunks of code, and there's definitely times where we could make it tighter, like make it less wordy, but then it just becomes harder to read overall. So I'll leave all of that in there. And this is Mo, by the way, making the photo bomb. All right, so don't step on the keyboard, buddy. Come on. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at one last challenge here for the night. As soon as I can find the browser window. All right, and I guess we've got two different choices here. We could either do Hungry Hungry Hippos, or we could do My Coworkers. I'll let you guys decide which one you want to take a crack at. So Hungry Hungry Hippos is you're playing a game with 3 other people. Every round, player 0 will eat 3 pellets, player 1 will eat 4 pellets, player 2 will eat 6 pellets, and player 3 will eat 1 pellet in that order. The game ends when there are 0 pellets left. Write a method that takes in the starting number of pellets and return an array containing which turn the game ends on and which player eats the last pellet. All right, and so again, looking at using some of these same things here. And the other choice, My Coworkers, is your given input is a nested array of colleagues. With the nested array, there are your colleagues, titles, and characteristics of them. Write a function that console.logs the colleague's name, title, and their characteristic, and then returns true. So any preferences between these two choices?
The hippo one.
You want to do the hippo one? Anyone else strongly disagree? Going once, going twice, doing hippos. All right, doing Hungry Hungry Hippos. And so again, read the notes down here. It says consider using array methods, pop, push, shift, unshift. And so you're basically going to need to loop through and subtract a specific amount of pellets on each iteration that you're doing. And then once the game hits 0 pellets, you need to end the game and announce how many turns it took and then the player that we finished on. And is everyone okay with the same teams again, or do people want me to shuffle them?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, then I will stop the recording here. All right, so this is the Hungry Hungry Hippos. Basically, we're playing a game of Hungry Hippos, 4 people playing total, players 0 through 3. The first player to go eats 3 pellets, second player eats 4, the third eats 6, and the fourth will eat 1 pellet. So the game ends when there's 0 pellets left. Write a method that takes a starting number of pellets and return an array containing which turn the game ends on and which player eats the last pellet. All right, so with this, I know that because I'm going to have to be taking turns, that's iterating, that I know I'm going to need a loop here. I also know that I'm going to need to keep track of the number of rounds that that we're playing. So first thing I'm going to do is create something that holds the number of rounds. So we'll just do let rounds equal 0. And then I need a while loop. So because we're counting down here to a specific event. So basically, for me, the way I look at it is when num pellets num pellets is greater than 0, we're going to keep playing the game. Once it's no longer greater than 0, we're going to stop playing the game. All right. So, and we also need to keep track of our players, right? And so our players, we're just going to put them in an array, and we need to keep track of the number 3, 4, 6, and 1. Right, and pretty much everything I saw from both the teams, you guys had gotten to this stage no problem. All right, and so index position 0, 1, 2, 3, and here we go. So now when I loop through my my players, I'm going to need a nested loop here. So first off, as soon as the game starts playing, I need to increment a round, right? No one wins on round 0. The player is going to win on round 1 if there's only a couple of pellets. So first thing I need to do is increment my round, and I'll use Courtney's notation on this. So round plus plus instead of the round plus equal 1. Either one will do it. And then, so let's go ahead and take a look here. Let's do console log rounds, and that needs to be rounds as well. So this is just going to create an infinite loop, and you can see I'm counting for forever because I'm not decrementing the number of pellets. That's always going to stay the same. So let's go ahead and create the for loop. And every time I go through this for loop, I'm going to want to basically iterate through each of my players and give them a crack at eating the predetermined number of pellets each round. So for this, I'm going to do players.length, and I'm going to increment by 1, so I++. So now we can take a look at doing num pellets minus equals players I, right? So I need this first time through, I need players I 0. So it's going to subtract 3 and then 4, then 6, then 1. All right, so 2, 6, -2, -6, -12, -13, because that first one's only 1, the second one is 9. So the first player eats 3, the next player eats 4, and then the player after that eats 6. Now I need to end the game when there's no pellets left. So in Hungry Hippos, you can't have negative numbers. So we know that basically when player 3 took their turn and they ate their 6 pellets, they could only actually eat 2 pellets, but that put the game to a stop. But the computer keeps going because I'm going to iterate through basically all 4 players each time I do this. So you can see, like, if there's only 1 round, I'm going to get 4 players, but if it's enough for 2 rounds, then I'm going to have 8 player, or basically like 8 player turns taken. And if there was enough basically for a 3rd round, then we're going to go up by 12. So we're counting by 4. So what we need to do is stop the game once we're at 0 or below 0, right? I mean, real world, you can't go negative, but for purposes of the computer, it doesn't, a -4 is just as good as a 0 in this instance. So if we say if num pellets is less than or equal to 0, right? We want the game to be over. How do we end a function?
Return something.
Yep, so we need to return something. So, and also you can return, like a lot of times we return strings or we return a variable. You can also return a object, you can return in an array. So my array needs to have my rounds and then, and not the player I, because what that's going to do is that's going to return basically the number of pellets that they eat in a round, right? So 1, 3, 1, 6, 2, 4. So 1, 1, and 2 are right, but I'm not getting the actual player. I'm getting, or basically they're asking for us just to return the index position, not the number of pellets that they eat. So I can get rid of this players, and all I have to do is return an array with rounds and I as the elements in it. 1, 0, 1, 2, 2, 1. So again here, like I said, is we always want to build incrementally while we're doing this, right? Notice I didn't move to my for loop until I knew exactly what I wanted to do in my while loop, right? I want to lay out any of the variables that I think I may need. And maybe you find out you have to come back and add one later, or you end up getting rid of one because you don't end up needing it, but you always want to try and get everything in as a good as position as possible in step 1 before you start working on step 2. Are there any questions about like the logic steps that I took here or the way that I worked through this problem? Does everyone understand what I did? Or at least understand more of it now than they did at the beginning of the night or the beginning of the week?
Yeah, that one.
Oh yeah, that one for sure. It's
Okay.
about a night and day for me.
Yeah, and it's just going to be exposure. And I think starting next week, and again next week, like we're going to hit recursion, which is a very different concept. We're going to hit that next Wednesday night. But we're going to do higher order functions on Monday night. And you're more than welcome to look at the slides, look ahead at stuff. But as you start to write code, and again, like I've got some comments in here, but you want to start making sure that your code is stylistically clean. So not having extra spaces in here, not having things out of order where you've got multiples in between them. So this will all be stuff that, like, I mean, the program still works just as well as it did, but it becomes more difficult to read visually. So we're going to want to start focusing on how do we basically produce the code that's as readable as possible. And we'll start to look at that next week. All right. So that is it for me this evening. It's 8:57. I'm going to stop the recording.